Welcome to Psychic Girls Next Door. We are your hosts, Lili
and Shannon Miller. This podcast is for all spirituality enthusiasts and psychics next door to share tools, experiences, and spiritual practices that align with your highest vibrational self.
On this episode, we'll be talking about the energy of anxiety, and I think a lot of us can resonate with this energy. So basically, as the definition of anxiety is just this feeling of worry, nervousness, maybe unease. Some people feel like there's like some event that might be coming up, and then you have no control over it, or the sense of uncertainty, I want to say, that might come with it. So we're just going to be talking about if we have experienced anxiety, how do we deal with anxiety, and the energetics behind all that. So maybe I can start sharing my own experience with anxiety. I think I have been experiencing anxiety since I was in my mom's womb. I come from a family that has been through a lot, especially my grandparents. They went through war. And I think that has been like a generational energy that's been carried through. And if you're not familiar with my story, my grandparents, they've immigrated to Brazil. They fled World War II when they were in Japan. And, they basically had to start from scratch. They came into a country where they didn't know the language, didn't know the culture, and they just had to survive and just adapt and adjust, and it was incredibly hard. And then, my parents were born into that environment. And then, comes me in the picture many, many years later. And I cannot even pinpoint the first time that I start feeling anxiety. It's been something that I've been experiencing since I was very young. I think since I was a teenager, I remember just being in any sort of environment. It didn't matter if I was in school, if I was just by myself, I would just feel this uneasiness, and I would feel like this, kind of like this butterflies in my stomach sort of feeling, like anything would cause me anxiety. That was the basic, that was my basic reality. If I have to go somewhere, I would feel already that social anxiety kind of creeping in. If I have to stand in line, I would feel anxious. All the situations would bring me anxiety. And the years went by, my anxiety got so bad that it ended up escalating to panic attacks. And at that point, I just knew that I had to make changes, because that was not a healthy state to be in. And I think also and I think anxiety comes in many different ways. Some people might have anxiety, could be just a momentary thing. Some people experience anxieties that kind of it's like a day-to-day reality. Some people have really chronic anxiety. And for me, my anxiety was at the levels of being very chronic. Mm-hmm. I have never been officially medically diagnosed with anxiety, mm-hmm. but it's always been there, especially when it escalated to having panic attacks, that was just terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you just know that it's a point where you just cannot avoid that anymore, because it's one of those things you find yourself feeling anxious. And then it comes in waves. It comes up and you're like, oh, okay, I'm feeling this. And it kind of subsides. And then you're like, oh, I'm okay. Mm-hmm. But then it hits you again. Mm-hmm. So it would come and go. And it was not until I actually started this meditation training that we both attended that I started realizing that a lot of my anxiety was this connection that I had with my body. And also I was very much in the future. I was always like, oh my gosh, I need this survival, right? I'm like coming to the US as an immigrant too. And again, like all the survival energy would just come through. And so that would cause me a lot of anxiety because I felt a lot of times I didn't have control over things. And there were things were happening to me and not for me. So that was also another thing that I worked on, just like also changing the perceptions around all that stuff. But this is like my story with anxiety in a nutshell. But I want to also learn how, if you have experienced anxiety or...
Which I have. No, but I want to know more. Like when you were experiencing your panic attacks, did you ever think like, I need to see someone, I need to talk to a doctor, I need to talk to a therapist, or I need to, phone a friend? Like when you were going through like, that time in your life, did you ever think like, I need to reach out to get, help in a different way?
I did, but I was at a point where I felt I had a lot of resistance in asking for help. And it's something that I've been working on a lot throughout the years. It's still a challenge to ask for help. And I think a lot of us probably have that issue. And I remember the first time that I even acknowledged that was just by telling a friend. I had a friend of mine, and she just asked me, like, oh, how are you doing? I'm like, I'm not doing well at all. I've been experiencing the symptoms. And just by expressing that for me was huge, because I've been always someone that would just like push it down. I would never suppress it. I would never like even allow myself to process it, fully feel it or process it. Imagine just like telling others. And I had this fear of like, oh my gosh, what are they going to think about me? So I had like all this fear pictures of, are they going to judge me? And just like all this judgment that I had about myself. I thought people were judging me. So that was my first step. But I never felt like I had to reach out to seek medical help. I think the meditation training came right when I needed, because that's right at the point, I want to say like around 2016, 2017, that's when this like really started escalating. And then a lot of times was my body, because it's a body communication. It was just telling me, you need to make changes in your life and you're not listening. So I am going to send all this warning, blaring sirens, and you have to listen. And that's when I remember I was like, that dramatic picture, just like laying in bed, like, universe, what should I do? Help me type of thing. And that's when I joined the meditation training. And that has, my gosh, it has shifted this energy around anxiety dramatically, So, I mean, in my case, that was case. I know there are cases where people do have to seek professional or medical help.
Yeah.
No,
thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think my journey with anxiety has been kind of, either silently constant or sporadic, depending on how you think about it. Like, I think I have always had anxiety in different forms. Like when I was a kid, I definitely had, I have social anxiety. I don't have it as much now. I think now I don't really care. Like, I'll talk to anyone who's willing to listen, and like, people are people, like it, regardless of if they're a CEO at a company or if they're, a janitor at high school. Like my dad worked as a janitor at high school, and something that he taught me was like treat everyone like a really great acquaintance. And I think that alleviated my social anxiety when he told me that I think he told me that in like 8th grade, 9th grade, somewhere in high school. He gave me that advice. And I think that really stuck with me, and call it like programming but it kind of resonated with me at the time, because then it took the pressure off of like me going into narratives about like, well, like, what does this person want from me, or like having to perform or having to fit in or whatever, like, narrative in my mind, and my anxiety kind of took over for the day. But I remember in high school, I would have massive stomach aches like every day driving into school. And I was like, I liked a guy who wasn't serving me. And I put a lot of my energy into that like faux relationship. It wasn't even a real relationship. I mean, we were friends, but I feel like, at the time he didn't really care about me. And so I had a lot of anxiety because I wanted something to happen that was never going to happen, like just being real about it. And I think when you experience like, I would have like bad gas, like just holding everything in my stomach. And I was like, well, thank God I'm driving alone. And
I mean, literally holding it in.
Yeah, holding it all together, feeling like I had to hold it all together. And like I had a lot of like I've had digestive issues forever. And I think when my need to control things has come out through like food. I think I've had a lot of different anxieties throughout my life that have caused me to kind of like take it out on my body in some way. Like in 5th grade, I overate on goldfish, and I was like addicted to goldfish for a little bit. And a lot of it was like in relation to like how I needed to look. I had gained a little bit of weight when I was 10, and like, but then I was like, oh, that probably was from the goldfish habit. So, and then, I in 7th grade, I made myself, go running after school every day, or like around like 4 or 5 o'clock, I would go running in my neighborhood. And I'm like, I lived in Antioch, like super, super ghetto. And I'm like, how are my parents like letting me run? And I remember we would walk like the track near the middle school that I lived at the time. And I was like thinking like, oh, this is, it's a nice activity to do with my family. But my mom would come with me and my sister, and we would all walk the track. But I think in 7th grade, it became kind of obsessive. Like I was very thin. And then I realized that it was a lot to do with like feeling like I needed to be perfect in some way. And like the anxiety of like, you need to look a certain way, you need to behave a certain way. And the 6th grade, I think all throughout middle school, I had like this huge perfectionist complex. I wanted to get straight A's. I just wanted to like have more for myself. I mean, my parents provided me just enough, like situationally, like that's all that we could do. And I'm grateful for what they could provide me. But there was always a part of me that always wanted more. And so I got a job when I was, 15 and a half, as soon as I could start working, so that I could, buy the clothes I wanted from Urban Outfitters, because we couldn't afford them at the time, or the money was allocated to other things like food on the table and like, being able to do swim team, or things that like where it wasn't for frivolous, like clothes and stuff like that. And so being able to like have control in some sense. And I think it transitioned from like food control to school control with my grades, and to like feeling like I needed to, just be better so that I could have better opportunities for myself. And then I saw a therapist because it got so bad in 8th grade to the point of like, it just was all consuming. Like if I was staying up really late, I was very unhappy, and I was suicidal. And I would say like, I wasn't to the point of like self-harm suicidal, but I just wanted to leave this earth. Like, I was just like, please, like, get me out of my miserable mind. And so I saw a therapist for a year, and she was awesome, and it changed a lot. And then I got to high school. Sure, she ended up moving, but I would see her weekly. And I think like just talking to someone about what was happening in my mind, and her being able to like provide me insight on just something different than what my mom was like at a loss. And my dad is a man of few words. And so it was nice to have somebody who was, maybe 15 years younger than my mom, who I could just chat with and talk things out with. And it was nice to like kind of get the attention that I didn't realize I was needing. And so that was kind of the start of realizing like I do have some type of anxiety disorder around like feeling like I need to be perfect. And then we kind of unpacked that. And it was mostly about like feeling this need to like control things and feeling this need to show up a certain way or be perceived by others in a certain way.
Yeah, it's kind of like you want to control how others perceive you.
Yes. Yeah.
And quite honestly, like, I don't even think people really care.
No,
like
no
how
one's paying attention.
everyone is busy with their own stuff.
Yeah.
And I think it is in our heads that we get like, oh, what are they going to think of me? And they're going to see me as weak or this and that, when in reality, it's just this overthinking that happens. So anxiety, a lot, it comes because you feel out of control, because you don't have control over what others think of you. And quite honestly, it's like, it's none of our business.
No.
What others think of you. I mean, I realize this now, but I probably like back in the days, like both you and we grew up, I think, and, back in the days too, where it was very, image based.
Yeah.
It was like a lot of, especially as women, a lot of emphasis on how women look and how our bodies should look and how women should behave. So there's a lot of that. And there's a lot of, probably you also went through, there's a lot of reprimanding. Or if you acted a certain way, so there's like, here comes a punishing energy.
Right.
Yeah, you shouldn't act this way. You shouldn't say this. That's not like nice girls. That's the nice girl syndrome, right? That's not what nice girls say or do. So then you it's that fine line between going to that people pleasing, not being yourself because you try to please others. And therefore, of course, you're not acting like yourself.
Yeah.
And anxiety is just gonna like, oh, hello, pay attention to me.
Yeah.
That's basically, it's just your body reacting.
Yeah. And it's also like whatever loop you're thinking about, whatever you're like I call it hyperfixating on. Like, so at the time, like when it got really bad for me, I was hyperfixated on goldfish. Then it was hyperfixated on walking the track. And then it was hyperfixated on running. And so trying to like change and like be really nitpicky. And I think that it's interesting that we're talking about this now, because like I'll go through waves of where I just literally am my own worst enemy. I'll like nitpick my body, things that I don't like about myself, things that I don't want others to know about me because feel shame from like, childhood or for whatever reason. And I think when I get on those like toxic self-talk tracks, it just becomes like, that's when my anxiety feels most like active. Because then I'm worrying about things like looking in the mirror. I'm like, oh my God, I'm getting a double chin. Or like, oh my God, like, I just look uglier every day or whatever it is. And like, I've been catching myself in those like really toxic, like self-hatred tracks. And I've always had these. And it's, from not looking a certain way according to my female lineage of how I needed to look as, a woman to attract a life partner or, a boyfriend or whatever at the time. And, I am a curvy woman, like it is what it is. And so when I get in these like negative talk tracks about like literally picking myself apart, that's when I feel most anxious because I don't feel confident. Most of the time, I don't care. Like, it's like, I feel pretty confident when it's in, but then it's like something triggers me to start thinking about it. And then I start fixating on it. And then I'm like, I'm not doing anything to change it. It's not like I'm going out and like running every day, like how I was before in 8th grade or 7th grade. Cause I saw that was not really serving me at all anyway. But lately the anxiety around like, it's like this literally the opposite of self-love. And it's like, I'm trying to be on this whole self-love track. But when you have those negative patterns of pretty much hating aspects of your body or things that you can't control about yourself, it becomes like this debilitating or like just mentally debilitating when it comes to like trying to be confident.
Yeah. Well, it's exhausting.
Yeah, it's exhausting.
It's exhausting.
Yeah.
And I think it has also to do with acceptance, working on self-acceptance. For me also has been a journey. And I don't know if there is ever a finish line around this. I think it's a journey for everyone. Just accepting this is who I am. This is how I look. And again, acceptance is not about, oh, this is how I am and you don't do anything to change it. I think it's just accepting who you are at your core. But of course, we always want to strive to grow and evolve.
Right.
Right. So I think to me, that's what feels like self-acceptance. But I think all of us probably go through this as humans.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think it's not like bad that you feel anxious. So that's one thing that I want to point out. It's just like, I'm so this and that because I feel anxious. And again, just look at the state of the world.
Oh, yeah.
My gosh.
It's a shit show.
Yeah. Basically, in a nutshell, that's what it is. You turn on the TV, you read the news, like every time there's something happening, there's wars, famine. The stress levels are really high with work, and we live here in the Bay Area. There's a lot of layoffs happening. So it's just like people are in a state of anxiety.
For one reason or another.
Yeah, and whatever it is. And it's hard for us sometimes not to match that. This energy that is kind of like, just like around us. So I think it's important just to find a space too where you can just turn it off from all of this noise so you can find space within yourself, because my gosh, it's overwhelming.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And like, I'm very grateful that my anxiety only comes up when I look in the mirror. Or when I look on Zoom, which is really fun all day long.
Oh my gosh, yes. Yeah. I think a lot of us have become maybe, I don't know about everyone, but a lot of us more self-conscious.
Yes.
Because you're like staring at your face, and I notice I do that too. Like I'm staring at myself, I'm like, oh, my hair, and then I start like, kind of like trying to you put your hand, you try like to pull like your cheeks, and I'm like, you start becoming aware.
Oh yeah,
of like certain features, and I'm like, when did this happen?
Right, right, and you like start to like get on this like weird fixated. Like I get really fixated with like, oh God, the gravity is not forgiving. Like this is like the angle of the like how the Zoom is like reflecting my image back to me, and then I'm not thinking about what they're talking about in the meeting. I'm thinking about my double chin or like, and I don't really have one. It's just the angle of it depends on who's looking, and maybe I do, maybe I don't. But it's like the perception comes into play, and that's when it kind of gets a little wonky. And it like warps your perception of reality, and it like then your attention is on it. And then even with manifestation, if your attention is on something and if you're paying attention to something, you're going to manifest it even further in some degree. So then I get anxiety about like, oh, I'm paying attention to this. Like
then you become more anxious because of your anxiety.
Yeah, exactly. And like I was talking to my coworkers a few months ago about like Miami, because like I might be moving to Miami soon, which is kind of cool for work. And so I was like, oh, it's really hot there. Like whenever I'm sweating, I get anxiety about being sweaty, and then it's a whole thing. Like, and I get hot from being anxious, and then I'm anxious because I'm hot and sweaty, and then it's just this whole perpetual like doom of hell.
It becomes like a cycle.
Yeah, yeah,
yes. But I think it's also important to notice when you are feeling anxious feelings. One of the things that I also started to kind of change in my narrative, instead of saying I am anxious, you say I feel anxious.
Yeah.
Because you shift the energy from like being
being anxiety.
Being
Yeah.
the anxiety, being the energy to just feeling, because feelings, they come and go. So like, oh, I feel anxious. And then I'll stop and I'll be, oh, hi, anxiety.
Right.
I feel you. Okay. What are you trying to tell me now?
Right. Most of the time when I catch myself feeling anxious, it's because lately when it's like, it's situational, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's like if it'll usually when I'm looking at myself in the mirror or on Zoom, I'll get like a micro, and that's like old programming, like from childhood that I know and I recognize, and I have the tools to like get myself out of that feeling. And I'm very grateful that I do. And like, I'm like, no, this is just like a false narrative about myself. Like, this is only my negative perception based on information from my family on how I'm supposed to look and like for what reasons. And then at work, though, when I feel anxious, that's another situation. That's when I am like, I don't have enough time. Like this narrative of not having enough time to do it all. And like, then I'm like, okay, lately I've been reframing, what do I absolutely need to do today?
Priorities.
Yeah. Prioritization. I try to do like the difficult things first off, just so that I can get it out of the way. And like, sometimes I am back-to-back meetings and I don't have the luxury of doing that, but I'll try to find the time of like, what do I absolutely need before my next meeting? What do I need to do? What do I need to do in the moment to make my life easier for this next meeting? And then I can move on to the next thing that I have to like worry, quote unquote, worry about. And I realize like I am in a constant state of worry at work. It's like the cousin of anxiety, I like to call it.
Yeah, well, it's part of being anxious sometimes.
Oh yeah. Yeah, just like worrying about like making sure I get everything done that I need to do. And like I have been like that a lot of when I feel like responsible, it's like a responsibility picture that comes up in my space. Like making sure that I am being responsible, I'm taking ownership. And then sometimes I'm like, maybe I'm taking ownership and responsibility for things that I'm not responsible for. And then a lot of the anxiety, I've been unpacking this recently, so that's probably why I have a lot to say on it. Basically, like when I'm recognizing like myself going into over responsibility or taking responsibility for things that other people really should be owning, that's when I take a step back and be like, no, I'm going to give myself permission to only show up for the things that I need to show up for, and only take responsibility for the things I need to take responsibility for. And then that has kind of released a lot of like this excess worry. Like I can't control what other people do. I can't control if they're going to do their work and when they're going to do their work. I just have to trust and like flow with the universe.
Yeah, I also call this calling your energy and your power back. Because when you put a lot of worry and this anxious energy on others, it gives your energy away. So anxiety too is telling you, well, where's your energy?
Right.
It's always like it's outside. It's outside because you're trying to control things. You try to become responsible, fix, save others and all this stuff. And then it's like, okay, you need to bring your energy back to your body. My situation now is that I feel anxious because of the transitions that I'm going through my life. A lot has to do with, again, work. And I think for me, what triggers me is like I go into past time energy where, I've been through situations of like extreme survival, and that kicks in again, like, oh my gosh, things are just like, so this like catastrophic, like, thoughts that come into my mind, like, oh, where I'm gonna live, am I gonna have money to this and that? So it's just kind of like it becomes like a snowball of
First
like
chakra.
Yeah, like
concerns.
it's very like survival sort of thoughts that are very intrusive. So that kicks in. But again, like I try whenever those thoughts and these feelings in my body come in, I just try to like take a step back. And again, like it's this energy that you have to bring it in and pause. And pause is so important because we're like, just like so caught up and just
What
like
can I do to fix it?
getting like, getting this energy of like, just trying to fix everything like right away. And sometimes it's like pause and then just say, okay, I've noticed that I'm like spiraling into this like all these like horrible situations that haven't even happened. Maybe
Probably won't happen.
it probably won't happen. But again, like sometimes our minds, like we go into this pastime energy and you think, oh my gosh, I felt that way. I'm going to feel it again. So I'm like, okay, I don't want to put energy into that. So I am safe now. And this is what
I love that.
I tell my body that, okay, I'm safe now. We're okay. We're okay. And I think, and this again, like, I'm not saying this is easy.
Yeah.
This is not realistic for me to say that, but it's a process, of like, of course, like we've been through the meditation training, we've been able to like do all this inner work, but I think it's a lot for anyone that is listening. I think it's taking a moment to do some self-reflection too and get to know yourself. I think the more you get to know what triggers you and what does anxiety look like to you, what does it feel in your body, and then you start catching that.
Yeah.
Becoming more aware, so then you can say, okay, what's the next step? Okay, I just say, okay, I am safe. I'm okay. And then I speak to the universe, say, okay, I see what you're doing. I trust you, but I trust that I'm also going to take actions in order for me to feel, that I'll be okay too.
Yeah,
So I think it's not like a one size fits all, I think
No, and it's continual. It's doing the work every day.
It is a daily practice, and again, those feelings of anxiety might show up in many different ways. It might hit you in the face.
Right. Yeah.
It might come out of nowhere like, whoa, it might be subtle too. You might find yourself, I also, you mentioned about social anxiety. I've also struggled with social anxiety up to this day. I've had times where, oh my gosh, I wouldn't leave the house because I would become so anxious going anywhere. It didn't matter because I didn't want to be around people. I felt overwhelmed. I didn't want to talk to people. I just went into the space, and I think COVID also didn't help,
totally.
right? Because we all had to stay home
Exactly.
And then you start socializing again. So there's this anxious feelings that come up about, of course, you don't want to get sick and all this stuff. I think now we're in a better place, 3 years after, but it's been a journey into it, and I recognize it, whenever I feel, and if you have been, my friend throughout the years, and also Shannon, if I cancel plans, don't take it personal.
I know.
Because I do have times that I'm like, I just cannot do it.
Oh, totally. I always love when people cancel on me because then I get my own time back.
Have you ever heard of this, they call it JOMO, right? Which is the joy of missing out. That's me.
Yeah.
I have like absolutely like no like intention of like participating like in events and all this stuff, being out and about. I'm like, no, I'm just good of like, if I can stay home and chill, that's my vibe,
totally. Yeah. No, it's so interesting because last night I had social anxiety. So I was like at a restaurant with my friend Brittany. I took her out for her birthday or belated birthday dinner. And then I saw this group of people staring at us. And I was like, why are they staring at us? I was like, is there something on my face? Do I have pizza sauce? I immediately went to that old narrative, there must be something wrong with me. That's why they're staring at me. And so I caught myself and I'm like, why do I do that? Why do I immediately, if a group of people is staring at me, why do I immediately, and it goes back to this, wound of not feeling seen or fear of feeling seen, or when you felt like you weren't seen for so many years. And then when people start to look at you, it's a really weird sensation. And so it was like, okay, I still have a little bit of work to do on that. I just constantly question, why are they staring at me?
Yeah, because you start feeling it's all about you.
Oh, yeah. Right. You get in your self-talk tracks, whatever those are. And it just becomes this thing, even though I'm like, they could have been looking at someone past me. I have no idea.
Yeah, it could be about anything.
It could have been anything.
Yes.
Yeah. But it was like, I'm like, why are they staring at me? Like, I just kept fixating on it. And then, but I would catch them throughout the night, like just staring over in our direction. And I was like, there's not really a lot of things to look at over here.
Maybe they thought you were beautiful too.
That's,
Hey,
that's very nice.
That's
I
awesome.
never, it's a thought I never think.
Right. So we can also entertain that. I think as people go into this, I don't like to call negative. I'm just going to call negative in quotes,
Right.
all this like, unhealthy,
Right.
unhealthy thoughts and patterns. I'm like, well, but what about flipping,
opposite.
the narrative? Well, maybe they thought, ooh, look at those girls.
Oh my God.
Right? Isn't it like, I always like to kind of like always, because usually when we go into those thoughts, we always tend to think like it's black and white.
Right.
Like, oh, it's because I am.
It has to be this.
Oh, it has to be this. It's
Yeah.
because, they got a problem with me.
Right,
It's kind of like that attitude of
right.
just like, it's a defensive, right?
Oh, totally.
It's a very defensive energy.
Yeah. And then I try to like energetically shield myself because that's something that I can do. But I've been trying not to do that as much unless I feel like I need to. Just trying to stay open and like, if people want to stare at me, they can. But I don't want to see them staring at me.
Yeah, well, it is uncomfortable, but again, like it could be so many different things, but we do get caught up in our, in this, my gosh, this overwhelming thoughts and lists that we have in our minds. And again, it's a lot of past time information that's still kind of like running the show, like, kind of like behind the scenes. There's all the subconscious thoughts that unless we bring it to the surface and become aware of it, it's always going to be there to run the show.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to, every time you catch yourself feeling a certain way, and again, don't judge yourself or don't shame yourself, because when you do that, then you give power away. So it's just, just pause and breathe. Okay, I feel this way. Just let it kind of pass through you.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I feel like I needed to air out all of my worries. Apparently, my anxieties on this episode of Psychic Girls Next Door.
No, I love it. I
have anxiety.
Yes, it is. Yeah, I think it's important for us that we share also that as psychics, we're humans too. Mm-hmm. We also deal with feelings of anxiety. And, if you are feeling this way, just know that you're not alone.
Yeah. And if you really need to like reach out for help, like, if you had a similar experience or if you're experiencing a similar experience to what I experienced in 8th grade, I was very lucky to have a mom who took me seriously and listened and, sought like professional help for her daughter. And, there are tons of resources out there. We're happy to link the resources on our page. Like there is help. And if you are feeling like you need professional help, definitely follow through because it literally saved my life.
Absolutely. I feel that asking for help is really important. So please do so if that's what you need right now. And please feel free, of course, to leave any comments, share your stories. We're also here to hold space for you. But thank you so much for joining this episode, and hopefully you will join us next time.
Thank you so much from the Psychic Girls Next Door.